I have nothing to open the show with. I was just thinking of what I could say, and I got nothing.
I talked to Jesse Eisenberg last night.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw him at a restaurant I was telling you earlier. Then I was like, thought about Social Network, and then I thought about Zombieland. It's like one of the best movies ever made.
Yeah.
But I didn't say anything clever to him. We just talked about Polish meat.
I'm sure he's heard it all.
It's pretty cool, though. Man, we've been hacking in React this morning. I don't like it, man. I don't like it. You could have told me I was going to like it. He said, come back to me in 6 months after you start React. He told me that.
He told you weren't going to like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do not like React right now. I was trying to remember what was fun about it when we started, and I can't. It's like a bad relationship. And then you like break up, and then you're like, oh, but she was so nice. Like you just remember the good things.
Yeah.
And, sometimes you just remember the bad things, depending on the breakup.
This morning when we were pairing, it felt like we traded all, like we get all this like this use effect stuff,
low level,
all these like functional primitives. That's kind of hand wavy. What is it like? We get
access to low level things that are closer to the metal. They feel more as part of the rendering cycles of the React application, and you feel like you can have more control in some sense.
Yeah, and it feels like we give up like variables.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
If you have use state and you have x and set x, and you call set x, the value of x won't be your new value until the next render.
Right.
And like you can make the argument, oh, this makes sense because of this, but it's still like you have to think about it.
Yeah.
Which you're giving up. You're giving up the way you think of like setting state in Ember.
Yeah. I think we might be learning React. One of the things we thought about this morning was that we might be learning React at one of the hardest times because the most established patterns are all class-based. We haven't written a class-based React app yet, and we've only used hooks. And hooks are like new, and they really seem like they're only half of the puzzle because of suspense. Mm-hmm. And I think the React team thought suspense was going to be ready sooner, and it's not. And so we're in a weird purgatory phase of React where it's like hard. You don't have all the tools you need to really build a whole app.
Do you think that? Okay, I know you don't know the answer to this, but I'll ask anyway. Do you think that there's a world where suspense comes out and then like all of a sudden we're like, oh, hooks are great?
Yeah. The reason I'd say no, not quite, is because it still feels like there is issues we were running into. It had nothing to do with async stuff.
Yeah, that's my feeling.
It had to do with rendering. I feel like there's a world where there's higher level hooks that we use to compose and build applications. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's how like your average everyday React developer is doing this stuff. Like we're trying to write apps using only use state and use effect and use ref and use context basically because we want to really understand the primitives, but like it makes it really hard and it feels like there's gaps.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is that we don't really have a problem with JSX. Like my JSX experience has been super enjoyable. And it's just all the stuff before the return statement. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like trying to translate business logic into hooks is that's where like I actually have to think what I'm trying to do and then map that to like the React way.
Yeah. The thing that I'm still, and as we were talking about this and working this morning and stuff, and even yesterday, I was just trying to think like, in my mind, if you're like, oh, that thing you wrote there doesn't work because you're going to be on the last render cycle and like there's going to be a new render. To me, that's like you've already lost me in the sense that like I'm trying to use the tool as intended, and the whole point for me of React is, and to some extent like any declarative rendering framework, is that you don't have to think about rendering. Like when you wrote render functions in Backbone, you have to say, okay, emit a change, now go re-render because the thing's changed. And the whole point of React is like you just set state and like the reconciler works, the VDOM just works. Your UI is always going to be in sync. And that's basically true for a lot of rendering in React. Like if you give me a template and I update state, like the UI is going to be in sync. And like there might be like 3 or 4 renders that happen, or React might like batch renders that happen. But like from the user's perspective, it's a black box. And if you look at the UI, it's going to be up to date.
Yep.
And that's like the whole mental model of React. And that's like a good thing because you're just like, all right, as long as I set my state correctly, then like the UI is in sync. The problem is with all this stale state stuff, whether you're calling set state and then doing something further down a component that relies on that latest version of that state, or whether you are doing anything with asynchronous stuff where you get bitten by the closing over stale state of a previous cycle. That's the stuff that we've been continuously running into.
I wonder if there's a wide enough gap between like setting state in JavaScript and then rendering HTML to the screen where you can just say like that. You can just assume that's going to work.
Black box.
Yeah, black box. But then as soon as you're like setting state in JavaScript and then accessing state in JavaScript, that's like those are too close together. And
it's too hard to abstract them.
Yeah, my mental model of how JavaScript works
is being violated too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. That's really interesting. Because like when you have like let, foo equals Sam, foo equals Ryan, and then console.log foo, it's going to be Ryan.
Right.
And that's how JavaScript works. And that's how JavaScript developers expect things to work. But in React, if you, let foo, set foo equals use state Ryan, set foo Sam, like if you console log foo, like what's it going to happen?
Yeah. And this goes back to what you said.
It's confusing.
Well, this goes back to what you just said, where it's like when in the rendering phase, you don't really care if there's batching of rendering or 3 or 4 different rendering.
Right.
But in the JavaScript side, you actually do care about that.
Because you might be in an event handler and sending data over to a server, and obviously it matters what data payload you're working with, or if the order of the to-dos is the correct version as of the latest thing, or if it's a stale version based on when like the button was actually clicked. Mm-hmm. So that's really tough. It's really tough.
Part of me wants to say like, I wonder what it would look like if we spent a lot of time creating like higher level hooks and using higher level libraries to solve all this, and we're just kind of gluing those together.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's really fair for me to say that like, oh, React would be so much more enjoyable if we just use the higher level stuff, because I think if Ember had this problem, I would be critical of Ember of it, and I wouldn't say, oh, the answer is just use higher level stuff.
Right. Yeah, it does seem like when we do go to like a use store with the context, we avoid some of these issues because of the object equality stuff that we've talked about before, the identity.
We just think, how would Ember data solve this?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good high level mental model for sure. And then I got into it, I got into some discussion on Twitter again, and again, kind of hit the same topic that I had to hit a few months ago, and saw basically, Ryan Florence and Dan Abramov kind of talking, a little bit, saying different things. And so that's just adds to the confusion as someone trying to learn React and seeing kind of community leaders and core React team members kind of saying different things. There's a still open question in my mind about reads and writes, and then those happening as a result of rendering and those happening as a result of events. And so the particular case we had was, there's a couple things. First, let's say you need to set state. Let's say you have some state and you need to set state. Is that an effect? And we were like, yeah, it's an effect because it like changes things. And so if you just have some state and then you say like, if day is Thursday, like count is some use state with this 1. And then if today's date is Thursday, set count to 5, and then like just render the count in a p tag. That's your whole React program. And we were like, that's kind of like an effect. Like you can't render it and then call set thing 5, because it's like, and then if you do that, React will throw you an error, right? Then we found this stuff in the guides that kind of does something like that. So first you like use an effect and like you can do that and it works. Conceptually, it's weird because like there shouldn't be 2 renders to do that. It's just like one piece of it's really your initial state. You could imagine like setting your initial state. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's not state because it's not changing over time, right? It's like just the initial value. So you could like just get the initial value doing that logic and it would be fine actually.
Right, but in a functional component, it's the code where you run the initial value has to return or something to render. So
I'm just saying, like, you could see, like, use state. You could actually pass that thing in. It's just weird, right? It goes back to this thing where it's like, if I had like let count equals 1, and then if new date dot to string is Thursday, then count equals 5. That'd be fine. But I can't do the same thing with state. You know what I'm saying? Because like you can't just call set state in a render function like that. You hit issues. Except we saw that example in the React docs that seemed to do that. So I'm still confused about that.
I think there's something that if you just are always calling it every single time,
it
throws an error. It throws an error.
Oh, okay.
But if you have it in if, I think if you do a few renders, I think there's some threshold there that doesn't error. Because the example in the docs, they have an if statement that is true on the first render, set state, and then the second render, the if statement's false, so the set state never runs, and that component does an error.
Got you.
So it's yeah.
To bring it back to the higher level point, I think the open question in my mind is, if you're talking to the designers of React and you're asking them, how should I be thinking about all this? I don't know the answer to the question, like, should I be thinking about the render cycles or not? So let me explain. So the first case where it's like you set state and the DOM is up to date, to me, like, the whole benefit of the mental model of React is like you don't have to think about that. And like they've even said before, you know, when the thing re-renders, it's kind of like an implementation detail of React. And if you're thinking about it, it's kind of leaking. So like the whole point is like React can batch things, and it's doing things with like CPU thresholds. And it's like you need to write your components in a way that is abstracted from you. So to me, when you have to think about that and change your code to accommodate that, that's a problem. That's like, to me, that's the React abstraction leaking.
I mean, if you ask them, do you have to think about this? And they said, no, you don't. To me, that would be dishonest.
Yeah, I agree too. So the reason I think that's not the complete answer, even though it seems like that is the point of React, but that's actually not the answer, is because if you read the docs, they will start mentioning like render cycles, right? There are parts where they say like, use ref will not trigger a re-render. So, but that's actually fine, because they're saying, okay, as long as you use state and you play by these rules, you can just set state and render is going to reconcile and it's going to be fine, and you don't have to think about re-renders. Except that, like, we always do. Like, we always run into situations where, like, you do. You know, the big one is like, set state, and then the thing is not available. So this is the other thing with hooks.
Or having event handlers defined at render, but the data has changed by the time the event handler fire, stale state bug.
Yeah. The really tough one, though, I think the toughest one that we've identified, we could really boil it down to the simplest reproducible case kind of thing, is like, you click submit, you update local state, and then you try to do a post request with that new state, and it's not going to be correct, because unlike in Ember, when you call set state on the next line, you can't read that. Now, in the component class version of React, set state has a callback which you can use, which is guaranteed to run after the state is updated with your call to set state. That seems totally valid to me. If it's something you have to learn, that's like a valid answer to me. Like, it's just like, okay, because like set state, you can't really think about it as like foo equals Sam, and then like you can just console log foo. It's a different thing. They even say it in the doc somewhere. Think of set state as more of a request to change the data as opposed to actually mutating anything. So like, okay, that's kind of like adjusting your mental model. But then the problem is that the hooks version of use state does not provide you with that at all. There's no callback. So there's no way to call set foo using a hook and then say, I want to run some code directly as soon as I know that this set request has gone through. Like, the request to change state to Sam has been processed, and now I want to run some code that does this. They'll say, there's no callback version. If you want to do something as a result of that, use effect. So then you have a problem, because then you're writing a use effect that needs to run some code if this state has changed. But the problem is that the effect is divorced completely from the logic, the part of the application where you change the state. For example, if I'm clicking submit on a form, I change some state and I want to run some code, but now you're telling me I need to put that callback into an effect that's like just on its own. It's a disconnected thing, and like there's other things that could happen that could trigger that effect, but that's the only reason I want to run that code.
That's key right there. That's
like the key that we've realized, that is like, the effect is going to be that you're intended to write effects that synchronize with state. But then in another thread, Dan Abramov said And I'm just saying him to represent the beliefs, like trying to understand the beliefs of the core team and how the design was meant to be thought of, the mental model that was supposed to be used. That if you do submit or click or something, that is a result of user events. It's not a result of rendering. So I can find times where he said that should be in a handler. That kind of code should be in a handler, not in an effect. So you should not use an effect if you're doing something like saving a to-do after clicking a button. It should be in a handler because it's derived from the user event. It's derived from the event. It's not derived from rendering. To me, that's so clearly obvious.
Well, here's another example. So say you click submit, you change some data, and then you have an effect that saves a to-do. Okay, that means anytime that you change data, your to-do is going to be saved.
Right.
But that's not what you want.
Right.
You
It's
only
not at
want
all.
it when the event happens. So it should be
Yeah.
with the event. And then
And if you start adding code to the effect to make it only run
to
when that happens,
juggle.
you're just
did click form is
Yeah.
now true. And it's too much juggling.
It's ridiculous. Also, the effects are basically like it seems like effects should be thought of as like able to be thrown away. Like Dan would say things like, don't use effects for persistence and mutation operations because if you unmount, like the effects might not run. Or if someone clicks something 4 times and you want to track that they clicked that 4 times, well, React might batch things up the next 4 renders and effects 1 through 3 might not run. Like, because it's all about just like setting state and running and having effects sync with state. But like, you don't want to sync this effect with state. You want to run this logic as a result of a user event.
Yes.
So that's it.
Yes.
So effect is wrong there. So
Well,
then it seems like we're in a weird spot right now because if use state doesn't have a callback version, but you need to set state and then run logic as a result of an event, it's like, what do you do?
Well, I mean, we kind of went down this road, and there's like multiple things you can do. They all involve bigger refactors,
Right.
You know, the things like not relying on old state, so
Right.
not relying on stale state. Like if you need to save a form, you're tracking that some other way.
Right. Right.
Use a ref,
Right.
right?
Right.
And it's funny in like Ember, I would use this, right?
Right.
I
And you
do
would
like
never have this problem.
to-do
Or
dot
view.
text, yeah.
Because this whole thing came about, we're literally converting the exact same view to do application, which is all public, by the way. If you're interested in the code, it's all under Mirage.js organization. It's going to be the exact same thing. We're showing how to use Mirage with Vue, Mirage with React. We're going to write tests for all of them. And we're literally copying like, the same architecture, same CSS, everything. And in Vue, it's all this dot, and it all works like you expect. You never even ran into any of this stuff ever. Dude, we even run into it when you have a computed property which doesn't exist in React because you can just use local variables because it always is unsync or whatever. It always re-renders, but it actually doesn't always work because if you say let done equals to-dos dot filter by is done false dot length, and then that's now just a free variable. It's like at the time that runs at the top of your render function, that's like 4. And then you can't just use that everywhere in your app because you have code in the render function that's running, that is running conceptually in a different render cycle.
Yeah. Time matters.
Yeah.
And exactly. It's fine to use like in the return statement. It's fine to use in JSX.
It's fine to use a template. That's the beautiful thing, right?
Everything syncs perfectly.
Yeah.
But then if you have anything that ever runs like, after that cycle, I'm just going to use cycle as like a vague concept, but after that
Tick
cycle
or whatever. Yeah.
Tick. Now you have to account for like, did things change?
Mm-hmm.
And that's
so as we were coding more and more of this thing and becoming less confident in what any of this stuff meant or like whether it was up to date, we were just like, okay, like, is this the right thing? Do we need to use a ref here? Like, do we need to pull this out? Is this going to be stale? Like, does it just happen to work right now because we're not prepending things to the array? But if we were, like, the index would actually be wrong that we're looking it up. So many things like that because you don't just have like in the callback this dot to dos and I just know it's going to be the right thing.
Hey, I just thought of something going back to like the has changed and computed properties, and I wonder if that should be an effect. So you have an effect.
It's not an effect.
But I wonder if
it's not an effect.
Has changed is like, could it be an effect? Like has changed depends on the current to do and the to do, like what you're editing. It depends on the current to do and the form. if you think about it.
Yeah, it's derived from state, though. It can't be an effect. It's derived from state. It's like, seriously, like you have to-dos. You have 3 to-dos in state. That's state. It changes over time. Like,
But okay, because so that's my question.
Remaining to-dos
can you
is
use
like
effects to derive things from state? Like if I have like set,
it's not an effect. There's
set,
no effect. There is no effect.
but I want has changed to be synchronized between.
You're saying it's like an observer or something like that.
Yes, exactly.
Which is like
Exactly.
how you're thinking about effect. But it's not. No, it's not an effect.
But what if I had an effect that depended on the to-do I'm editing and the form, basically the value that's in the text input?
No, but this is the thing. Like, why does it work in the template? It's because if it ever changes, the whole thing re-renders. So this is, again, why the reason this is a problem is because promises and sequential steps is not fundamentally a thing that can be thrown away and re-rendered. Subscriptions can, which is why like subscriptions are so much better of a match in terms of the modeling, how it works with the effects. But if you just think conceptually what's happening, we have render cycle here, render cycle here, render cycle here. We've got like first render, second render, third render. If you give me state, I can give you HTML every time. Doesn't matter.
Right.
And I can throw away the last HTML and give new state, and I can do my magic and reconcile everything. And that's such a beautiful, clean model that works wonderfully. But if you think about all the code, just think about the to-do app lifecycle. Like we've rendered here. Now you've typed in some stuff. We've re-rendered every time you've typed it. And now we're here and we click a button. But like now we start re-rendering again. But like the code here, I care about that code.
Yeah.
So it's like I want that to be running outside of render. I want it to like send a message somewhere and just like let me do the thing because I know what I need to do with this state. And then, you know, maybe this is where like Redux and Reducer comes in because like that goes outside. And like maybe if you're using all that, even use Reducer like in a context and you just don't have that because like conceptually this thing is re-rendering. But like if this logic is not fundamentally something that can just be thrown away and come back at will based on the state, which it's not, like HTTP requests are stateful things. Like it's a stateful thing.
I think you're really onto something with the async because with the async, you still care about the callback even after 50 re-renders have already happened.
Yes.
Like that callback.
And you don't want to rerun it. You can't rerun that thing like in any...
because it's attached to like, it's a promise. It's attached to the promise chain.
Yeah.
So you can't just clean it up and like redo it. So the things
you could imagine almost writing the whole logic of like the handler. What if you could write that as a function of state? It would be like a mini state machine, and you would be like, I'm on step 1, do this. I'm on step 2, and here's the state of the store, do this, and the state of the request. If you could fully describe it in terms of the state, then you could run it at any time and know if you've ever run this line of code. But like you don't actually want, that's crazy.
So like your dot then callback to like a fetch that posts data could be like a function.
Yes.
But if I do any more re-renders, replace that function with the latest re-render.
Yeah, exactly. Something like that.
That could open the door for like other things. Like imagine the to-do changes to another model.
Yeah.
So it's like they're still juggling there.
Yeah, and you don't want to do that. You want to do that series of steps because you know that. I think it might be interesting, just kind of talking out loud now, like being able to do it conceptually and like, actually not conceptually, being able to do it literally outside of the render function in like basically a reducer that is just not entangled with lifecycle at all feels like it might solve some of these issues. Because, and then if the reducer is changing the state of store and the store is being passed as props into your component trees, then they're just re-rendering, that's fine. But that re-rendering is not messing with that logic at all. That's like changing state, right?
Yeah,
so
okay.
You know what I'm saying? And then like in the dot then you have another action in Redux or whatever, just a reducer case that's like, all right, we just created a new to do and you're just thinking about it like, here's the state of the store, here's my new to do. You don't care about the old index, you don't care about that stuff. It's as if you received a new to do over WebSocket and you just do it right there. It's not about being in render cycle.
Right.
You don't want to think about a render cycle. If you get a WebSocket event that says, here's a new to-do created, you do not want to be thinking about render cycles. It has nothing to do with rendering. It has to do with if you're conceptually making a global cache, right? So in the same way, if you're responding to a click handler, you don't want to be thinking about render cycle. It's going to bite you.
Yep.
So you want to pull that out of rendering if possible. And basically, so far, when we've done that in the past, we've done it by having a global context called store on the root app component that basically never gets re-rendered because your app component gets rendered once, and that's it. And then that's it. It doesn't matter. Now, your app component could have state that you call set state, and it re-renders the thing. But like conceptually, I think the context is like a stable object that's just there, and like it's going to have methods that can like mutate that state, and it's not going to be a problem. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yep.
But if that's true, like you would want that to be you want to be nudged there by the React APIs or the guides. Like state is good when you have like component state, and you want it entangled with like the life cycle. But like, yeah, as soon as you start doing something async, basically,
there's it's like a concept here of like fixed state that lives outside of rendering.
And maybe it's like our Ember brain, but like I don't know. I don't think it is.
I don't think it is because it's the way we think about our app is like we have a list of to-dos.
Yeah.
And then I'm editing those to-dos and I'm adding to-dos and removing to-dos, but we still think of it as a global list of to-dos. We don't think of it as like
render. It's not
to-dos at n-1,
right.
A different to-dos list at n-2, a different to-do.
Or not even n-1 about rendering at render cycle 586 or render cycle 587.
Yeah.
It's independent of rendering.
Right. Yeah, we think of the to-dos as like it's like the to-dos in our database in our backend. There's only one database. There's only one backend.
Right. So, we talked about that on a previous episode that server-side data basically means identity, like global identity, and that's like
by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be post React Conf.
That's true.
So we'll be singing our praises of React next week.
Yeah, eating our words here,
riding the hype train.
It'll be interesting. I think it might be good for me to go through. I think kind of like just to wrap up on this segment, like I kind of maybe think I should go. It would be helpful to go through all the React docs, just read the whole website basically, and feel like how much of rendering am I supposed to be aware of as I'm building React components. By the way, when I'm working in Vue or in Ember, I'm like not. Ember, I'm like 2% of 1% of the time when the run loop comes up in some way. Like to me, that's the same level of like leaky abstraction where like, oh, that thing didn't do that thing because of the run loop, and it's like, okay, shit, and now I have to import next or something like that. But at least it's like it's pretty easy. But it's like you don't really, it doesn't leak that much. Barely leaks. The run loop barely leaks.
Can I make one more observation that I noticed today? So, one thing we almost always reach for eventually, not like to start, but eventually we reach for refs in our React components, and that's kind of like an admission that like, man, having like instance state on this component would be awesome. Because like anytime we are using a ref, it's like basically the equivalent of doing like this dot prop equals value.
For sure.
So it's not the fact that we go to this so often tells me that, having this
and objects
would be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. And again,
having objects would be helpful.
I don't know yet if that's because we're not doing something right or if that's just because that's the reality of it. Because like, again, if you kind of hear Ryan Florence talk about React, he's like, there's state, there's effects, there's rendering. And like, that's it. And like, that's a beautiful thing.
That's fair, yeah.
But like, I would like to see how he solves some of these problems because it seems to me also in their talk recently, they used effect for a lot of mutations. And again, that seems like a no-no from from some of the things that Sebastian and Dan have said. So that's kind of where I'm at in terms of this stuff. I think I'm going to try to write some of the stuff up in a blog post to get more like input on it, just to formalize and kind of clarify our experience here. But yeah, that was this week in React, and right now I'm not a fan. It was just so funny because like we were copying over the Vue code. I was literally like copying over the event handle, like the event handlers, and then like it would be like this dot to do dot text equals whatever, and I'm like, okay, I have to remove this because like to do is a local variable, and it's like, oh man, that's so great, no more this, like kind of tongue in cheek, right? But then it's like, oh yeah, you remove this dot, and then you have to like make all these new lines of insane code. And you're like, I actually missed this dot. Like it's way simpler. Like it's not actually that much of a problem. So then we started talking about like, the hook stuff. I know they didn't just put it out there for no reason. I know there's a lot of research and experience and time and people struggling with it. So I don't know. It's kind of weird to know because based on my experience, learning Vue and learning React at the same time, Vue is like way more. It's like way easier. Now Vue has a new API that doesn't use this anymore, so maybe I'm just getting old.
It's not me that's wrong. It's the children.
Dude, really though. Man. I wonder what some of those React apps look like. I'm open again. I'm open that I'm completely wrong. I'm looking for the answer, so I don't know yet, right?
Yeah.
Like, I had this thing, programming advice compared to design advice, objective and subjective. It depends. And there was a thread from Yehud on Twitter that I wanted to talk about, but I can't remember what thread it was. I think I was just thinking about, how Steve Shoger does these like. Did we talk about this last week? Steve
I don't think we got to this.
Does these like design tips.
Yep.
And it's like the shadows thing. We did talk a little bit about it. The shadow, like it's an objective thing. It's like if you have a shadow and it's not offset based on the light source, you're doing it wrong. It's not realistic. It's going to look wrong. Objectively, you can say that. But
yeah,
then,
I think we did talk about this.
But then like in programming, it's like if you were to do the equivalent of those tips with like a check and an X, can you really ever? It's like almost you could never say that. Ben Orenstein had a course on refactoring Rails, and he made a point to emphasize like, here's the trade-offs here, And so many times when we think about this stuff, and it's like, when do you refactor? When do you duplicate? All that kind of stuff. When do you use this abstraction? When do you not? A lot of times, my answer is like, yeah, didn't we talk about this? Like,
yeah, we did.
It's just like when it feels bad, and then it's like a question of like developing that experience.
Right. I think programming and programming systems are more complex than. Oh my god! I'm gonna get roasted for this.
Than design.
I think the design, there's more constraints.
But there's things that are definitely like wrong. Like a lot of people. This is maybe another way to phrase this question. If you had 10 experienced developers looking at a piece of code, how many of the 10 would say, don't do it that way? That's a bad practice, and that's a good practice. And there are some times where you could get 9 or 10 of them to agree.
Yep.
And then there's some times where you'd have split 50-50. Right?
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
I mean, there's some times where you could get, everyone giving a different answer.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Yeah. So thought that was interesting. And in terms of like rules being really valuable for beginners, I do think rules are valuable. Like even some of those tips that like Steve provides, like let's say experienced designers could break them. Like let's say left align text. Like if you're new at design, just use left align text. Center is like super hard to get right. Just use left align text. But obviously an experienced designer could break that. But that rule is useful for a beginner. You should use left align text. You should have all the things in refactoring you have. The line height should be this much. You should cap the line length at 75 characters. Yeah. Those are super useful. And so Sandy Metz's rules in program, in Rails community is like a similar kind of thing, which is like methods are 3 to 5 lines, and that's it.
I want to take back the statement I just said about designers having it easier, because it's not true. But is design better understood? Like, have we been doing design longer with not just like websites, but just like
in the natural world?
Natural world, like design we just have way more experience with design.
Yeah,
and
I think that's possible. Like we definitely live in a designed world. Like everything we interact with is like designed by someone, and there's all sorts of things like affordances, and that carries over to like web design as well. So that's a pretty good perspective. Also, like, man, I hate abstract arguments, and we have something else on here that we might get into. But like, I've just become so tired of like, you know how DHH is really good about saying like, show me the code. Mm-hmm. I just have so little patience for people who make arguments in the abstract, because I feel like you can say whatever you want to say. It's like the whole Taleb skin in the game stuff. I see it all the time. And sometimes the programming community can get like that, where they start talking about functional programming or object-oriented programming or this, SPA architecture or services or cloud, whatever it is. And you're just like speaking in like complete abstract. And you have some advice, hopefully, like you have some experience, hopefully, that you're drawing this from, but like to actually generalize it and be correct, I think that's very, very hard. So I think it's useful to share experience and to draw on your own experience. But I also think like it's just too easy to try to make those kind of academic, armchair philosophizing arguments. And so I just don't put a lot of weight into when people talk like that. To me, it's like, I'm just going to open my React to-dos component on the left and my Vue component on the right, and I'm going to look at them and I'm going to say the code on the right is like way cleaner and easier for everyone to understand, even the people who didn't write it.
But not like even I want to go even further in that. Just like your attitude today while working on the React component, your attitude sucked. No, you were like, we were bummed.
Super energy drained. Yeah.
And so that
it was not
that
fun
right there.
Yeah. So I think back to your question about like, do we know more about design? I mean, I think maybe like, maybe there's aspects of design that are like the shadows thing. You can just point to the real world and you draw on that, and you can make like an objective statement about it, or at least mostly an objective statement.
Like if I have a button, the shadow is going to be on the bottom, and then when I press it, it's going to be on the top.
Yeah, and like maybe with programming, there's aspects of programming that are like that. Like you have a variable that's like poorly named, and we could sit there and like when we get a right name, it's like, yeah, that's right, and like that's something that you pretty can agree on. But that's such a different level than saying you should build this system as a distributed system. We should pull this database out and make it a Kafka system, and that's gonna, it's like there's so many trade-offs there. It's a lot of risk. There's a lot of unknown unknowns, and then it's really hard for me to. Yeah, it's hard to know.
The risk thing is interesting because the people that are making the abstract arguments don't take on any of the risk.
Yes,
when you
that's
follow
the biggest
advice,
problem,
and that's that bad news.
I mean, I even think that's a problem for us. Like we do training, and like we're not working on the same kinds of apps we do anymore that we used to at TED. And Jason Fried has said that like he feels like advice has an expiration limit, and I think that's as we do consulting and we also do mentoring, and so I think the things that I learn from those are like the things I place the highest value on, and the things we try to share. But when it comes to like a new technology comes out, I'm going to hold my opinion back, because I could say something confidently, and do my best to form an opinion, to present my opinion based on my first reaction and my, 7 years programming and all the experience I have, but it's different. It's so different than doing it.
I think this is where a bunch of our like why we're not writing Octane comes from.
Right.
Even though like, we know it's going to be good. We think it's going to be good, but yeah. We don't have experience with it.
Yeah, why we're not teaching it, you mean?
Yeah, why we're not teaching it.
Yeah, right now, because we haven't been using it yet. Right. Yeah. We're going to be doing that, but like, right, that's why, or even talking about it compared to other things. Like, we're going to wait until we start using it heavily enough and it's ready enough for us to want to use it that we can do it, right? So, yeah, it's tough. It's tough. I also, part of me also thinks like a lot of times like it doesn't actually matter. Like people want to know, the extreme version of this is like all programs should be Haskell programs or something like that. And it's like the other version is like you would be just as fine with, if you had chosen Angular or Ember or whatever, you would have been fine or something like that. That's like the other extreme version. It actually doesn't matter. And people they try to generalize. They try to make inductive conclusions from their specific examples, and it's not. Their generalizations are just not true. And so, it doesn't mean that their experience isn't valid, and that things like if they're having fun doesn't matter. That does matter. It's just not true that there's a general principle, a universal law that is that's more important. Like the rule of least power comes to mind, something the Ember community talks a lot about. And it's something that I like. It intuitively makes sense to me, and it is appealing to me intellectually, and I've seen the benefits of being constrained, but it's also like, what does it actually look like when it plays out? If people who have been writing handlebars templates were writing JSX, would it actually matter? I don't think that's a really like hard question. That might be an impossible question to answer.
Yeah, I know. And also too, when you think of like the success of a project, I mean, there's so many factors. There's just so many factors. So to peg it all on a technical decision. And, I'm not trying to like cop out of this and say you can use anything, but
right.
I think you should optimize for enjoyment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
So all of our programs are going to become Haskell programs.
For Ryan's enjoyment.
For my enjoyment. I enjoy watching you suffer.
That's the kind of person you want on your team. Just maybe we can real quick talk about this podcast I listened to this morning. It was I really like the Software Engineering Daily podcast, like a new podcast I found. It's very like general. It's something I thought I wouldn't be interested in because he just talks about so many things. And they keep it, they go like he's talking to software developers, but it's like, how can you be talking to like a Java developer and, me as like, hipster like JavaScript. I don't know anything other than JavaScript.
It's easy. You just make fun of MongoDB.
Yeah, exactly. So he has all these different people on, and he's all over the place. It's really interesting. They had the people who made Darklang on it. Actually, it turns out the CTO of Darklang is the founder of Circle CI. He was the CEO there. He didn't like being the CEO. He stepped down in 2015, and Circle CI has done really well as a company since. He actually credits like the management team that they put in place, because he's just like, I like doing product. I'm not good at like scaling up a team and all that stuff. So he deliberately wanted to be the CTO of the next company, and so he found someone who's good at the CEO stuff. I can't remember either of their names, but he has a co-founder who she's a CEO. So they were both on the podcast, and they were talking about Darklang. Remember Darklang came, they had like a release post like a month ago.
It's like you write all the code in the browser, and then it's like you're done.
Yeah, basically. That's it. It's a programming language that's not open source. It's a language, and it's an environment. It's an editor, and it's a deployment environment in the cloud, VC backed. Lots of easy ways to make fun of them.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Does it use the blockchain?
Potentially. So there were some cool things I talked about here. I'm still trying to like understand it. I just was like interested in the idea because I actually went through and made a thing. I think I made like a route handler, and you can make like your first production route handler in like 8.5 seconds. You like click a new thing. You click a new, basically like new sandbox. You say, oh, get to /hello world, and then return. It's like writing a Mirage route handler, but it's like a real hosted API. It's already there. That's it.
That's really impressive. So also this aligns with our philosophy that like backend is becoming more and more commoditized.
Yeah, for sure. And so they didn't really answer. What I was interested in is, why does the programming language have to be closed, like not open source? They didn't really talk about that. Like most programming languages are open source, like, right?
Yeah.
Anyone can use it. You have to be a customer of Darklang to like write Darklang. And then like if you think about your backend being, you wouldn't want your backend code base to be tied to a provider. Like that seems weird, right? But it almost feels like it's not. It's more of a software as a service, and whose UI happens to be a programming language, as opposed to like buttons and dragging things. Like you could imagine defining API endpoints by like clicking using a UI.
Yeah. But
they're like, oh, we're just gonna give you a programming language to do it. That's like hyper focused on it and is like maximally flexible as much as any other programming language, because and so that's kind of interesting.
I mean, maybe that's it. It's it. Yeah, exactly. Flexibility.
Yeah, over like a constrained UI. And then something about, it's like, they said like, your deploy time is like 50 milliseconds. So remember that episode we talked about a few weeks ago, and you were like, oh, why can't you were talking about like staging servers are an anti-pattern. I think that's what that episode was. And you were like, I should just be saving my thing, and then
that's like the ultimate conclusion.
Yeah.
It's like I'm editing production code.
Yeah, exactly.
And every time I save, it gets deployed.
Yeah. Adam was like, yeah, that's how it used to be. Like PHP files on FTP, you just open it up and save it, and you're in production. This is actually what's happening here. It's like they call it deployless code. Deployless.
Cool.
Super interesting, right? So the code is actually like in an abstract syntax tree. The programming language is actually, you're actually like manipulating an AST as you're coding. The parsing, they talk about the parsing being something about when you're coding, like it's already in AST, they can present it to you in the editor in different ways. So like they can actually present the code in like different languages. Whereas like every programming language is in English, but they can, like you see like get to hello world and then function return, hi. That's all actually like a presented AST. You're not actually editing that code. And then like when you change a character, it like transforms into an AST and like makes the AST manipulation.
I have a question. Couldn't you make this argument for like everything? Like couldn't I write JavaScript and you have like
I think so, but I think the parser for JavaScript is like super complicated. And so they made something that was like deliberately like easier to do that part of it. Anyways, that's not super important. He kind of talks about that, but he's kind of talking about why he felt like this all needed to be integrated. So yeah, it's pretty cool though, right? Like, so it's like instant deploy. You're in production already. They call it like Deployless. This was another part of why a programming language. So they used what do they use at Circle? What language? What are some of like the big concurrency languages?
Like Erlang.
Keep going. What's the
Erlang? Elixir.
It's
Go.
no, it's
Scala.
maybe
Closure.
yeah, that was it.
Okay, I'm just listening to program. I have no idea what the concurrency model of any of these.
I think it was Closure, and I think he loved it.
Okay.
He there was so much he loved about it, but I think Closure. Closure, an active process of closing something. I just typed in Closure and I got a definition for it. I wanted to see the page for the Closure programming language because I wanted to see.
Closure is like a Lisp that runs on the JVM.
What about it's like? Does it have a home page?
Yeah, it's like there's a J in it.
These are all defining closures: lexical closure, function closure. It's called Closure, right?
With a J though. Not an S.
Closure.
Yeah.
Oh. Today I learned. Yeah, it has this like lambda symbol, right?
Yeah.
That's like what all the cool kids do. So dialect of Lisp. I just wanted to find if it said anything about concurrency. I can't find it. Anyways,
I think because functional languages don't have global mutation, that it's easier to split them up.
That makes sense.
If you have you can't have two threads looping over an array and mutating that same array because that's like the bad news bears of threading in Java.
Right.
So I think that functional languages get around it.
I see. Makes sense. So he was actually saying like the concurrency primitives in Closure and other languages like it, Elixir or whatever, they actually work against cloud architecture because servers can be spun up and spun down. So he was saying languages like Ruby that encourage you to use like enqueuing and background jobs are actually better suited for the cloud.
Interesting.
Super interesting, right? He was saying they had issues with it because at Circle CI, you would have like notifications for builds being done and like they would just get dropped all the time basically because like there's like high concurrency things happening and like in a serverless environment, servers are getting spun up and shut down again and like you just lose them. And so like you would lose those notifications. Whereas if you were building that in Ruby and Rails, you would have a job system. Like those servers that are getting spun up and spun down, because Ruby doesn't have concurrency, how do you do it? You have to use jobs. You have to use background jobs so you don't block the whole program, right? Like in Rails app.
Sure, you use like persistence to share
outside of the thread of computation.
But that doesn't seem like it. It seems like that's outside of programming language. It seems like
you could do that with the language, but it's not encouraged to because like think about a node, right? Like in Node, it's like asynchronous IO, right? So like seriously, the things that you would have to do a background job for in Ruby, you don't have to do that in Node. So you just don't. So like the whole programming language and community in Node is.
But Node. Okay, I'm just
handling requests and blocking on like reading a database or an expensive operation. You wouldn't. Okay, you would build it differently.
Can I make this argument back to you and tell me if I'm following? So in Ruby, if I'm going to do a long running process in like the middle of like a request response cycle, it's like going to block
the world. Yes,
but in Node, I can have
a callback because you have libuv or whatever.
Okay. And I can get the response out to the client.
Yes.
But it's still going to block on my web server.
It can handle another response.
It's still going to block my web server.
Well.
Yeah, because if it's like
no, but you have an event loop. Like, so it's not going to block the thread of JavaScript, the JavaScript thread. It's you can wait for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I can. Okay, sure.
That's why like a single Node server can handle 10,000. That was the whole reason Node was created.
Right, like
that was the whole reason.
C10K or whatever.
Yeah, it was like we know how to do this in Rails with like load balancing. Let's see if we can do it with a single server using an event loop basically and a key like not what is it? Event loop? what's the stack in the browser provides and that libuv provides to Node?
Event loop.
Yeah, event loop. Yeah. That lets you do this because you can wait for an expensive operation like a disk read or something like that, or something that's a database query. Like your database server is taking a long time to respond. Meanwhile, like your Node server can handle other requests, whereas your Rails server can't.
The whole callback architecture. I think Ruby has some. So we don't write like callback, and our Rails applications are not callback based.
Right. We don't. So what you do, partly because of Ruby's language design, you are nudged to use background jobs. And he was saying,
but Ruby, okay, I'm getting like super pedantic here. I think Ruby still has, like, if I have a request come in, and then Ruby needs to go to the database.
Yeah.
That IO is going to block that request.
Yeah.
But then Ruby can still handle another request coming in.
The same app server?
Yeah, I think that Ruby, for a while, that like IO won't block. Yes, I think Ruby, that request, that code that's handling the request is blocked.
Mm-hmm.
But I think other code running on that Ruby process can handle it.
I don't know if it can. The whole reason Node was built with JavaScript is because JavaScript in the browser is exactly designed with the event loop where you click on a button and it doesn't lock up the UI. That's a whole...
Yeah. For any UI, you need an event loop.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why it's particularly well suited to handle, for a server to handle requests. Because what's a request? A lot of times it's a fast thing and then you have a slow thing and you want to block the whole thing. So that's why...
Okay.
Like that's why he didn't use Ruby. I have a pretty superficial understanding of this. So
I'm going to look this up.
We can circle back. Yeah.
When this ends. I'm not sure, but I think Ruby has some optimizations here where like there's certain spots where IO doesn't block, but for that particular request in your Rails app, it will be blocked, but you can still handle other stuff.
Right.
I don't know. I'm sure all the Ruby experts are screaming the correct answer right now.
We can definitely circle back up, but basically like, anyways, like Node and Clojure and other language are like particularly well suited with this concurrency model, right? And so when you are writing programs like this in those languages and doing something like handling notifications, you're just going to handle it in the code. Whereas if you were doing this in Ruby in a Rails app, you would use a background job thing because you don't want to. Yeah, it's a different question about whether you want to lose it or not. It's like whether how to handle those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so how to handle those kinds of things in Rails is...
By the way, I'm sorry for that massive...
No, it's fine. It's fine. I want to... We'll definitely look it up because it'd be good to understand it. So he was saying, actually, in a serverless environment, because conceptually servers are basically like ephemeral, that the background job and enqueuing model is actually a better match. And so they were having troubles... Long story short, they were having troubles with Clojure with some of these notifications at Circle CI. He knew that going in, that it was going to be... These kinds of things were going to be important for building Dark and writing APIs. And so that was also another reason why they went down that road with making up their own language and trying to get the best of both worlds, basically.
So does that mean the language has like a concept of like enqueue this for like another worker to pick up and process?
I don't know. I'm not sure about the solution. I just know.
Because that'd be really cool. That's like that's pretty cool. It's like a language that's... That feature would be meeting a lot of developers that run into this, that have these problems. And like Rails is pretty good with active job, but it's still like,
it's a separate,
hey, go pick the best thing.
Right.
And so
Rescue or Sidekick or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And then even in Node, like it's hard. You can never get more CPU.
Right.
So there are times when you get a request and you just want to enqueue a job for some like beefy CPU server to handle.
Like rendering a fast boot request.
It's oddly specific.
Just throwing it out there.
But yeah, so it would be awesome if like the language itself had just this is how you do things async.
Yes.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's like those are like the languages that I'm attracted to.
Yeah, that would be cool. And it could like spawn things off if you need more resources or something like that.
Yeah, it could like there's
like in Node we spawn up.
Sorry, I'm gonna make an awful joke. Keep going.
In Node we had to get that thing that was like worker killer, and we like spawn workers to do that. If that was built in the language, that could be really cool. Instead of like using libraries for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it just manages that. Anyways, kind of interesting stuff. They're both pretty cool. I like them. Then they started talking about they got into like this economic stuff that was kind of bothering me about what they're competing with, and they don't use Amazon for their cloud provider because they don't like Amazon is like big and they're evil or something like that. I was just kind of rolling my eyes.
So where Where are the computers? And they were like,
There's another
in mom's basement.
There's another alternative. They touched on, apparently there's this thing called Ballerina. Do you know about that?
No.
And the host asked them why they thought it failed, like why they thought like they were going to succeed and this thing failed and all this stuff. And the guy was like, I really like Ballerina. And he was like, dev tools are we're a fashion driven industry, and projects that succeed aren't necessarily the right ideas. And he was also kind of talking about this with Amazon. Like Amazon is just so big that even if they're not providing like value, they're going to win because of like their monopoly. And I was just kind of rolling my eyes. But anyways, related to the stuff we were talking about last week, about like, does popularity matter? It was just interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think that's interesting that it came up. He's like, there's no correlation between what people choose and whether the ideas are the right ones. And I was like, I don't think that's where I'm at right now.
Well, if it's like what is most popular, I think it's right. But what a random team chooses, like, is that the right tool for their job?
No, I think he's saying like popular.
Yeah. So this actually makes me worried about
Dark Lane.
Yeah.
Yeah. That I know that's how I felt by the end of it. I was like, that feels like you're bringing a lot of things that aren't relevant to your decision making, or I don't know, just kind of interesting. And then this goes back to like, anyone can make the argument that Amazon's a monopoly and like the world's going to be worse off unless they're broken up, because that's like the most abstract argument ever. And like, that doesn't matter what you think about that. So I just choose not to really like having it. I have my own opinion about it, but it's like, I don't actually put a lot of weight when people make those kinds of arguments.
Yes. That's a very abstract argument.
Sorry, yeah, that's it. I don't really want to.
There's not get into that.
Not really. No, it was just, anyway. Yeah. It's just, there's been like, there's companies that, from my time studying economics, there was lots of times where people or governments or industries thought there was a company that was a monopoly and they had to break it up, and they did. And then like the next thing was actually the bigger thing, and like it would have been better for them to stay around and compete with them. I just think the market is so dynamic, and I don't think, also Amazon has like less than 50% of market share. It's not a monopoly. It's like, maybe you could argue it's like the biggest player in an oligopoly or something like that. But I just think the market is so dynamic that, even if they have economies of scale and they're cheap, people are willing to pay more. Yeah, you can't compete with them on price, but you shouldn't be trying to do that, obviously.
Right.
It doesn't mean you can't compete with them on something else.
So it's the same reason. It's the same reason we pay Heroku.
Yeah.
Even though the code is literally hosted on AWS.
Yeah, of course. So
there's value that gets provided. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't think. I just don't. Anyways, it was interesting. We'll put a link up to the podcast. I think the whole Dark Lang thing was pretty interesting. But it's also just like, kind of what you're talking about, like very similar ideas of like, hosted backend, a backend you don't write. Me playing with Hasura, and basically that's like the extreme where you're not even writing in code.
Yeah,
it's like so constrained. You just like click some buttons in the UI. For me, that's awesome. It's like the dream. And then like instant Deployless. I mean, there were some really cool like ideas in there.
Deployless
sounds like Ryan's alley.
Like that is a trend I can just.
Yes,
I'm gonna go change my Twitter bio right now.
Future Deployless architect.
Yeah.
No, for real though, that's pretty cool, because they were like, the CEO, she just did a good job of like explaining. He was kind of like, why are you passionate about this? Like, why are you putting so much into this, so much time? Like, why do you believe in this? And she's like, yeah, you like learn this new thing, and you get set up locally and you build this thing and you're so excited. And you're like, hey, it works. And then you have to like, it just sucks. Like, this thing works. And like, now you have to like somehow share it with everybody. And she's like, you just shouldn't have to have that step,
I'm trying to think, like,
it was super interesting.
I'm trying to think here. It's like, this is like IDE language,
yeah,
and production environment all rolled into one.
Yeah. I'm
trying to think like, what are some other ways to get a 50 millisecond deploy, that some different configurations. Just thinking like, if like certain sides of each of those things were like easily adapterized,
right?
So
not
like
bundled, unbundled.
Yeah. Anyway, that's to talk about abstract arguments.
Pretty cool though, right?
Yeah.
And then she was like, what else did she say? Oh, he was kind of like, she was kind of said something. She was going on about all this new vision, the things she was excited about in the future and stuff. And she was like, yeah, we used to do like Rails and Heroku, and now we do this. And then the host was like, wait, don't we still do Rails and Heroku? And she was like, yeah, but if you think about all the steps there, it's like, maybe if you're experienced, like in 30 minutes, you can have a new Rails app, because like you have to have like your environment set up. Like you have to have, and you think about it after they've been talking about this for an hour, and you're kind of like, yeah, that's actually true. Like you have to have Ruby installed.
Oh,
it's like completely.
Wait, this is 100% true. Even though Heroku is super easy, like I'm working with a team now, and like we stumble on this once every few weeks.
Yep.
We just run into some little thing.
Yep.
So I do not think that Heroku is the end of the line.
Yeah.
At all.
For sure. And just the idea of like, moving the development into like the cloud, which is how you do it, so that you don't have to manage any of that infrastructure, is like pretty appealing to me, you know? And there's something really cool they were talking about, like if you already have a front end. They were talking about like onboarding, like getting people on a dark lang and stuff. And she was like, it's actually really great if you kind of already have a front end and you just need to like implement the API contract. I mean, they almost said those words exactly. And I was like, boom, that's amazing.
So this is specifically for an API.
It's for an API. It's only for building APIs. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Backend APIs. Yep. And I was like, yeah, that's perfectly aligned with like how we think about front ends with Mirage. If I can give you a view SPA and show you the contract, and you can whip it up in Darklang without like having to do anything as far as infrastructure goes and programming languages, environments getting set up, it's pretty awesome. That would be a good test. Like I have these 4 endpoints, pretty standard REST API. Let's build it in Darklang and see. Yeah. Maybe the debt there is not as much as it looks like. Maybe the lock-in is actually not as bad, because like it's just as locked in. I feel confident using Hasura and then going off of it if you were a team and you were spiking on a new SPA, because like you have the API contract mocked out in Mirage and you just know how to build that. Like it's all public. So I don't feel confident doing that with Firebase, because it's like a black box and you're building an SPA that depends on Firebase.
There's literally Firebase code that lives in the front end.
Yes, exactly.
Where that's not true with these other things.
Exactly. So that to me makes it way more appealing. And more viable as like a realistic option.
Did they talk about anything like every time we go down this, backend as a service thing, there's always these questions that come up like, how do you do cron, and how do you do auth, and how do you do that really weird one-off endpoint that sends an email? Like, they
didn't get into it in the podcast, but I'm sure they have answers for it.
Yeah.
So that'd be good to check out. I was going to add auth to my public Hasura endpoint, by the way, which has like 10 recipes on it, and I use every week. And if anyone found the URL, they could go into the console and just own me. And I just was going to add auth. You do press a button. It's pretty cool. So on Hasura, you visit your backend Heroku app, and Hasura has a dashboard with all your database data and graphical, so you can make queries and mutations, and then a settings panel for your stuff, and then that button that says like your endpoint is unsafe. And I'm like, yeah, my name's Sam Selkoff. That's what I do. I don't think about security. And then I click on it, and they're like, all you have to do to secure it is just add a environment variable to your Heroku app, and it's like Hasura _ whatever admin _ password. So you just do that. You go to Heroku, and you don't even have to like redeploy anything. You just do it, and it knows to like reload itself because the environment variables changed, and then you go back and like the dashboard is password protected.
Pretty awesome. This is for the dashboard, but then you would still
for the API. So then you go to the app, and the app doesn't work anymore because the API has been authed. Like
but you're using like, let's say you're using Apollo. How do you
so that's where I thought this was going to be like a 5-minute thing, and it's not a 5-minute thing. So then they have a whole guide on how to do authentication and authorization. It has to do with user roles and how to get the key into your app. And so I need to follow that guide, but I'm going to do that and then learn how to do it. So that's going to be part to answer your question, which has been like, how do you do auth in Hasura?
Also completely,
I think it'll be pretty straightforward though.
Completely unrelated question. What ingredient do you hate most?
Like in my recipes?
Yeah, just out of curiosity.
It's a good question. Kind of over like broccoli and cauliflower these days. I eat a lot of that. It's like pretty healthy for you, but I'm kind of over it. I'm kind of like moving to like the kale and spinach category to try to get my greens in, You
might notice some edits to some of your recipes, adding some extra broccoli.
Wait, do you know the backend URL? It's pretty easy to guess.
All right, you're giving away too much info.
Keys of the kingdom here. Oh, that's going to put some pressure. Maybe so by a week from now, I'll have Auth on the app before
We
this comes
should just
out.
say the URL because this comes out in a week. So
We should make a fake one and get him on the wrong track. It's definitely not. Ryan's like, I work on a business with this guy. Didn't we just read that the Equifax violation had their main database protected by a username admin and password admin?
That was their mistake. They should have just done no password.
Yeah. Hasura authentication and authorization. For the record,
You should set up a fake clone of this website that's just all like super healthy food. Just like kale for breakfast. And people will look at it and they'll be like, wow, this guy.
so
How
healthy.
does he do it?
It's so healthy. And then they won't see my peanut butter energy balls.
And you can tweet and just be like, oh,
This is what I eat.
eating is so easy.
I have another app idea, by the way. It was gonna be a weekender this weekend, but I had too much fun last weekend, so I didn't get around to it. My health app, I'm gonna make it in Svelte. It's gonna be the next thing we do, Svelte and Mirage.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna do another app.
The whole, the food that you're eating.
Yeah,
And just
compliance.
like red or green.
Yep.
Dude, that's great.
Yep,
That is a
compliance.
really great idea.
And so you just add your meal. Was it a good meal decision or was it bad? Everyone knows the answer. You just tap green check or red X, and then it's going to show you your rolling 3-day average of your compliance, and then like 10-day, and then like a month. Because you don't want, think about it, if you don't want to misincentivize, right? Let's say let's say you're going for 70% compliance, which is like not even that. That's like, that should be a good first goal. Like, really, you should be maybe at like 80 or 90. I would like to eventually be at like 80 or 90 to maybe achieve my health goals, right? But like, if you're consistently 70%, that's pretty good. So the goal is to have 70% compliance with your health decisions, right? Your nutrition decisions. So in a single day, okay, if you eat out for lunch and dinner with like friends in town, you're not going to be at 70%. Mm-hmm. So like you want to account for that. That's like a realistic thing that's going to happen. And you don't want to feel like guilty for that. But like maybe you want to feel guilty if you have worse than 70% over the last 3 days. So like, looking at the thing, what your rolling 3-day history is. So over the last 3 days, let's say today I start and I eat 1 green check and 2 red X's. So I'm at 33% compliance. So I know going into day 2 and 3, I need some green checks to bring me back up so that on time I'm on day 3, I'm at 70%. And then day 4, it's going to look at days 2, 3, and 4, right? So 2 and 3 were pretty healthy. And so I'm at like 90%. So now I can have like 1 off, right? But I can't go crazy, right? Mm-hmm. So that's like the idea is like you'd want 3-day rolling average, and then you'd want like a week rolling average.
So I was going to say 7 days seems really good because we all have those weekends where like families visiting and it's just goodbye.
Right. But I think in addition to 7 days or 10 days, you'd also want 3 days because like you don't actually want like a complete red 2 days in a row or 3 days in a row and then all green 4 days in a row and think that's like you get a pass for that because it feels like
you would think that's bad.
I would think like if you do 3 days in a row, there's some consistency you want to build in. Well, that would be where the fun part of the app where you get to build in like nudge what's the behavior a good nutritionist would actually recommend for you. And I think if you do like 3 days bad or 2 days completely bad, it's pretty bad on your body. It's hard to get back. It's going to make it hard for you to stick to 70% over the long haul. So there's part of me that would be like, if I'm in day 2 of a binge, like, if I had a binge and I'm on day 2, I want to look at my 3-day rolling average and be like, if I don't make like 90% today, I'm going to miss my numbers kind of thing. Something like that. Just so you know, the whole point is to surface that like you've been making bad decisions. Like if you look at when I was like my last week in LA or whatever, it's like just lots of red. You want to see that like crisp, and then like the 30-day thing would be good too. So you could just see, and then like almost like Apple Watch style where you see the activities and you say, oh yeah, here I had compliance. I met it. So that could be pretty cool. So I'm gonna do that in Svelte and see how that works out. I'm excited to try Svelte. Authentication authorization, right? We've talked about this. I don't secure anything, so I don't know anything about these things. I've installed like a Ruby gem once for this, and I just followed the instructions. I like to think people are nice people, and we don't have those kinds of issues in the apps I work on.
Mm-hmm.
Authentication is you are. Authentication is that you are who you say you are.
Yeah.
And authorization is that you have access to this thing.
Yes.
Why do they name them? The first 4 letters of both of those words are the same. Did they know that when they named those things? Do they?
Auth.
Authentication is handled outside Hasura. Hasura delegates authentication and resolution of request handlers into session variables to your authentication service, existing or new. Your service is required to pass a user's role information in the form of session variables like X Hasura role, etc. More often than not, you also need to pass user information for your user access control use cases like X Hasura user ID. Seems pretty good. Session headers.
Yeah.
So, seems pretty good.
Interesting. So you set up like the way I'm interpreting that is you set up like a new service, like a new Node app, and then when Hasura receives a request, it pings that Node app and then gets back the roles and the
2 modes of authentication: webhook or JWT. Webhook. Your auth server exposes a webhook that is used to authenticate all incoming requests to Hasura engine and get metadata about the request to evaluate access control rules.
Okay, so that's what I just said.
That's what you just said.
And then JWT.
Your auth server issues JWTs to your client app,
And
which is sent as part of the request. Okay, so
with that, your auth server gives a browser the
I
JWT,
see.
and then the JWT gets sent over with every request, and Hasura
has some static information about
it
that.
basically has a key, and so it can verify. JWT is like payload that says everything about
It's
me.
like signature from AWS for
Right,
making an
right.
upload to S3.
Exactly, and then it also has a signature attached. So if you have the private key, you can verify.
Do you like that? You
No.
don't like JWT?
No. If you have the public key, you can verify it. No, I don't. I don't like JWT.
You would use the webhook thing?
Yeah, I would use the webhook thing, but that's just also like kind of how
You think about
I think about. Yeah,
Auth.
I would want it like, oh, I'm going to make a little Node app, and it's going to respond with info about the user. This is exactly what we do with Fastboot. I have like a Node app, and so when Fastboot is rendering a request, it can take the headers from the browser that requested that, because I don't want like
Interesting.
we use Rails.
So this is like
We use Rails session, and I don't want Fastboot to know how to decode a Rails to decrypt a Rails session to figure out who the user is, because I don't want to.
That's not the reason. Yeah,
I don't want our Node app, our Ember app, like doing auth, like deciding you are who you say you are.
Right.
So what happens
Right.
is Fastboot makes a request, not Fastboot, but we haven't, before we render Fastboot, like the node code that renders Fastboot makes a request to a little service that's sitting in the same area and says, that was very vague. It makes a request to another service with all the encrypted session info, and that's a Rails app. And the Rails app decrypts it and sends it back to Fastboot, and it says, okay, this person is, it actually doesn't identify who the person is.
It just puts them in a bucket.
Yeah, puts them in a bucket. It says this person is a subscriber and they have access to these things. So yeah,
This is where I'm gonna have to consult you. So this is like the answer to like the question of like, how do you handle non-CRUD things and like these backend as a service? And like maybe the answer is like you make a little web service, but maybe that's gonna be easier and easier over time. Like you could make a little web service or a little cloud function that triggers an email on your email provider, and so maybe it'll be good for me to go through this and learn this stuff.
One of the reason that I don't like
upload an image. I need an image upload on my recipe thing, so that'll be a good one to try out as well.
The reason I don't like JWT is because you have to, everything that is going to give you a JWT token has to have like the secret. I guess that's not a very good argument because like Rails is like that as well. Yeah, I don't have it. I haven't had good experience with JWT. So
interesting. All right, to be continued. Maybe by the time the next episode comes out, I'll have secured it. It'll be good too.
Yeah, we have a lot of homework. We
Yeah,
got to figure out Ruby concurrency model.
we got to write up this crap about React.
We got to write up the crap about React.
Yeah, Ruby concurrency model. Yep. And then Auth with Hasura. Cool.
Cool. All right, we've gone way over.
Hey, good luck in Vegas this weekend, man.
Yeah, I'm gonna go crush.
Just make sure you do all the right things and don't compromise EmberMap right before the end of the year and having tax implications and all that good stuff.
Wait, do we get a tax write-off if I play with EmberMap money? You know all those stories? Okay, you can stop listening to the podcast.
Postlude. New segment. You know what really grinds Ryan's gears?
There's all these stories about like how like, oh, FedEx or Southwest was about to go out of business and the owner went and played on a blackjack table.
Oh my gosh.
And
saved the company?
And it saved the yeah, there's all the, I forget which one. I think maybe it was Southwest. There's one of those. It's how...
Is that true? Is that really true?
I think there is a company
Like
where
a
there is
legitimate company.
where there's like an urban legend.
Yeah.
Urban legend implies fake, but I think there is a story like that. But like, that's such a bad decision.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're saying that right before you're taking our company credit card too.
Yeah. That's such a bad decision, and like that. Over the course of a company, there's so many little decisions you make.
You're thinking
like
about
that.
EV. You're thinking from the perspective of that's someone's decision making
with
apparatus,
that
like
bad of
framework.
EV.
Yeah,
that EV is so bad that like, I mean, I guess there's like a utility thing where like if I don't make this bet, the company fails because we go out of business because we can't pay for things.
And so they're not making that extreme version in other situations.
So it's like I have a 100% chance of the company failing or a 49% chance of the company succeeding. So even though it's a negative EV bet, the survival of the company depends on it. Yeah. But it just feels like that.
You might be giving them too much credit.
That decision making is so bad. And that person is going to like literally as a leader of the company is going to be making thousands of those decisions a year.
Yeah.
Probably more.
Yeah.
And so it just seems like the chance of going bust is so high. I just don't understand it. Also, this is why I'm not a gambler. Like, this is why, you know what I mean? It's like I've never.
Man has booked a flight to Vegas.
Yeah.
You know what gambling means, buddy? No, I don't know, man. That's why we need our next business that we start. We got to find some crazy person because we don't understand this stuff. We overthink it. We just need someone to be like, we're doing this, you know?
Okay, I'll walk around the Bellagio this weekend and find the most eccentric guy.
Yes.
And just be like, hey.
At the craps table.
You want $1 million? We want to invest $1 million in your business idea. Like the Uber for cats. Let's do it.
All right, everybody.
What if he's like, I have a great business idea. Shared office space. All right, let's end this.
Let's end it. Cutting you off there, buddy. Getting too rowdy. You haven't even gotten on your flight yet.
Yeah. All right. See you next week, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.